Holy sh**.
Hello and welcome back to The Layman's Perspective, the show where I'm still thinking about Dead Vision over a week later. Wow, this episode was a doozy. You guys know the drill. This is a spoiler review. Do not watch this until you've already watched episode 5, then come back and see what I have to say. Also, if you like this video, please give it a like, share, and consider subscribing to the channel. It really helped me out. Normally, I like to do my videos a little bit more off the cuff. I think it makes it a little more personal, a little bit more charming for you guys. But this episode gave me a lot to talk about, so I'm gonna defer to my notes on this one. So we start off with a cold open, right? And Wanda and Vision are trying to get the kids to go to sleep. A couple things of note in this scene before the credit rolls. One, Wanda's powers do not seem to work on either of the kids. Now, I would have thought this would have been the case with Tommy, who's Wiccan, who also has magical powers, but it also didn't work on Billy. We'll come back to this. But Billy has been roped into a lot of the magical elements of this episode where I thought he wouldn't have been previously. 2, Agnes shows up just as Wanda and Vision need her to in that scene. Agnes is acting super sus this episode, all over the place. A fact that is not lost on Vision. Wanda and Vision both kind of react to her behavior this episode strangely, but it really seems to get Vision. His whole thing this episode is he's not having any of it. None of the deception seems to be working on him anymore. He's figuring out more and more that something is wrong. She walks in and specifically says, "Oh, don't worry about me, I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." Now, if we do believe her to be the witch character that she may or may not be, was that a magic pun? I don't know. I suppose the weirdest thing that she does here is when Vision stops her from trying to touch and interact with the children, she kind of just stops in her tracks and drops her persona, for lack of a better word. You know, she stops smiling. The kitsch, jovial nature of it just kind of leaves her voice, and she looks at Wanda and she says, do you want to take it from the top? I'm supposed to hold the kids. And they both react strangely to this, but Vision reacts particularly in a confused manner. And he pulls Wanda aside, and she, like she has been in previous episodes, seems fine to kind of just wave all this off. Oh no, it's fine, it's nothing, she's just being weird. And Vision's like, did you really not see that? Because that was pretty strange. None of this deception, whoever's doing it, Wanda, Agnes, some unnamed third party, Vision's too smart for it to continue working on him. The babies stop crying, and while they at first think it's because they fell asleep, they look in the cribs and they're not there. And they turn around, and Tommy and Billy have both aged up to 5 years old. We see in the opening credits that there's a birthday cake with the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on them, so that's how old they are now. You'd think that would be the part of the scene that was the strangest to me, but I thought it was a little more strange that Agnes just casually sits there on the countertop as if nothing she's seeing is out of the ordinary. Not only does Agnes's strange behavior raise a couple of questions this episode, but it's also her lack of reactions to several things that happened throughout the course of the episode that just raises a bunch of red flags. This being the first one. She doesn't react at all to the twins just snapping 5 years forward. We then cut to the opening of the show. To me, I saw that this was aesthetically a nod to Family Ties and audibly a nod to Growing Pains. It seemed to be a combination of the two. We get some real stock photos of Elizabeth Olsen as a kid and as a teenager, and we shout out to baby Vision. It was so bizarrely hysterical to see a baby in the Vision makeup. I absolutely loved it. We cut back out into the real world, right? And so, where in previous episodes it was either all in the Hex. Side note, I'm so happy that we actually have an official word to call the bubble reality. I was getting jumbled every time I had to talk about it, but now we can officially call it the Hex. So, thank God. Every time we've been watching the two of them, it's either been strictly inside the Hex or from the outside sword perspective. And in this episode, seeing that it's 40 minutes long instead of 22, we're bouncing back and forth between both perspectives. Back in the sword base, we see Monica discussing what Monica went through inside the Hex. And a couple things that I picked out that I thought were notable was the fact that she used the words immense, hopelessness, and grief. We learn a lot about the timeline of approximately when the show is taking place, and it seems to be fresh after everybody gets de-snapped in Endgame. And if that's the case, it would make sense that that Wanda is feeling a lot of grief because, she died, and right before she died, she killed her husband and then watched him be brought back to life, only to watch him die again, on top of the fact that her brother's dead and her country has been blown up. If you really think about it, it's not so much of a left field, where did this come from, that Wanda is immensely mentally traumatized. So that definitely checks out. Director Hayward thinks that Wanda is acting intentionally malicious, while Monica still defends her, even though she was warped in the hex herself. She still thinks Wanda is not doing everything intentionally to hurt people, saying that she could have killed me when she threw me out of the hex, but she didn't. How big could the hex have gotten? Maybe it's her putting up her own quarantine. Maybe Wanda is doing her best to hurt as few people as she can. In response to this, Hayward shows everybody in the room a previously classified video of 9 days prior to the events that we've seen thus far, Wanda breaking into the Sword HQ and stealing Vision's body. Couple of things from this. One, I suppose this is a morbid prediction confirmed that this is actually Vision's corpse involved in this show. Not a fabrication, not a clone, not an illusion. It's Vision's dead body. Which, thinking about that scene again. Anyways, number 2. Why was his body at Sword in the first place? If you think about what that acronym means, that really makes me dwell on the sentient weapon aspect of what Sword does. Was the vibranium in his body particularly valuable? Was there some kind of clause in the Sokovia Accords wherein that's where he was supposed to end up? Were they trying to deconstruct the technology in his body? What were they doing there? Number 3, interesting little bit of trivia. This entire sequence that we see on Hayward's computer screen was actually supposed to be an end credit scene at the end of Endgame. At the last second, Kevin Feige cut it out and saved it for this, which I think was probably the way to go. I think that would have definitely ruined a lot of the mystery world building that they've been able to achieve with the show so far. Back inside the Hex, we see that the twins have found a dog. Now, I have so many questions and so many speculations surrounding this dog, but let's get a couple things out of the way up front. First of all, they named the dog Sparky, and this seems to be a nod to the synthesoid dog from the comic run The Vision, which is definitely, if nothing else, a property where they're certainly pulling a lot of the visual aesthetic inspiration of the show from. Now, my first thought was this some poor dog that wandered into the Hex by accident? But upon watching the whole episode, every time the boys age up, Agnes is there. I believe if she really is the character of Agatha Harkness, she wants the boys to age up for a grander purpose. She was there when they aged up from infants to 5-year-olds. She's then there in the kitchen where they age up from 5-year-olds to 10-year-olds. And she's there again at the end of the episode where they almost age up again to try and circumvent the childhood trauma of losing a pet. And you could argue that if Wanda hadn't been there to talk them down, they would have aged up again. If she wants them to age up, did she plant Sparky there from the beginning? Seeing as how wanting to be old enough to own a dog is what gets them from 5 to 10 in the first place, and the death of the dog was what almost got them to age further. You could even argue, if you really want to be dark, that she then intentionally poisoned Sparky to try and get an emotional reaction out of them. If we're going to go any further, and we're heavily speculating that Agnes is Agatha Harkness, I would heavily suggest that you watch the following video by Comics Explained. He runs a great channel. He's one of the places where I go to whenever I want a little bit of comic know-how that I don't myself possess, and it'll really fill in any blanks for you as to who the character is. What she is Agatha Harkness. She's a witch from the Salem witch trial-esque time period of things, and she has not only a heavy hand in the House of M comic storyline, which a lot of people, including myself, seem to think served as at least partial inspiration for this show, but she's also in cahoots deep with Mephisto. And if we are to believe that he is the big bad guy that's going to be revealed at the end of the show, then it would certainly make sense that she is in fact Agatha Harkness. Now, a couple other things in this scene. Yes, of course, the big speculation is why does Agnes want them to age up? But a couple of smaller things happen too. She shows up right as they discuss whether or not they want to keep the dog. Now, two things happen in this scene. One, Wanda manifests a dog collar for Sparky out of nothing. and 2, the boys age up from 5 to 10 in order to be old enough to keep Sparky. And again, Agnes doesn't react to either of these things. I'm going to keep pointing these out because there is only one thing in this episode that she does react to, but we'll get to that later. Vision heavily berates Wanda for using her powers in front of Agnes, and Wanda, again, she's almost in denial, just trying to wave everything off. Oh, it's fine, she didn't see anything, she doesn't care. And this prompts Vision to ask her, Wanda, what aren't you telling me? Back out in the real world again, we have Monica, Jimmy, and Darcy talking about whether or not Wanda is manifesting real matter, because they say if she is, it would be a tremendous upscale of her powers compared to what we've seen of her in the past. Now, I really like this, especially because Wanda, both technically in the MCU and classically in the comics, is a god-tier character. And I think that so far, both her and Vision have been tragically underused in the films they've been in. If you really think about the powers that were shown he has in Age of Ultron, really think about it, what did the Russo brothers have Vision do in Civil War and Infinity War, besides get stabbed and float around with some J. Crew sweaters on? So what I'm saying is it's nice to see them scaling their powers up to the level that they really should be. And Monica says as much, saying that, if Thanos hadn't initiated his rain fire blitz on his own troops, that Wanda would have probably taken him out solo. A little bit of curious dialogue here. Jimmy interjects, well, I would argue that Captain Marvel got close too, which, to be fair, she did. And the mention/discussion of Captain Marvel seems to upset Monica. She quickly changed the subject, and Jimmy and Darcy even share a look like, oh, what the hell was that? We don't know why this happens, and to be honest, I don't have any guesses at it. But it seems for some reason, between what we saw in Captain Marvel and now, Monica seems to bear some ill will towards Carol. On a broader note, we have Monica talking about the Blitz, and Wanda almost killing Thanos. We have Jimmy talking about how Captain Marvel, all this stuff, all this detailed play-by-play knowledge of the Battle of Endgame. I was just thinking, how the hell do any of the three of them know what was going on in such detail? And lastly, in this scene, Monica refers to an aerospace engineer who she thinks would be able to help with them, and sends a message on her phone. I have no idea who this could be. It definitely was an Easter egg planted for later on. I don't think that the insane cameo that we get at the end of this episode is going to be the last time that an actor shows up and surprises us. Perhaps this was a setup for someone showing up in one of the 4 remaining episodes who's, again, just going to surprise us and completely knock our socks off. We'll have to wait and see. Monica then goes to inspect her 70s-era clothing a little bit closer. And she takes Jimmy's gun and she outright shoots the pants, and nothing happens. And we realize that it's not a manifestation of new matter. It was Monica's Kevlar body armor that she went into the Hex with, morphed and warped into the 70s clothing. So she's not creating new matter, she's just changing and rewriting the existing reality. Now, as soon as I heard Monica say, Wanda's rewriting reality, I knew as I was writing down my notes for this breakdown that I needed to give you guys some reading recommendations, just in case any of you wanted to do some further research than the information that I give you in these videos. Specifically, the show seems to be based off of 3 properties: Avengers Disassembled, House of M, and The Vision. At least that's what I think. And if you want to know more about any of the 3 or all 3 of these stories, I would highly suggest you look at the following videos: Avengers Disassembled, The Complete Story by Comics Historian; House of M, X-Men The Complete Story, again by Comics Historian; and Vision, Uncanny Marvel Creepiness, WandaVision by Comic Drake. Especially House of M, these 3 stories seem to be where Marvel's pulling a lot of their story inspiration from, and watching these videos, if you're curious, will definitely help you understand the scope of WandaVision a little bit more, and perhaps where they're going to go with future episodes. We go back into the Hex, and we're at Vision's work. Norm gets an email on his new computer, and they make a couple of corny jokes about surfing the internet, but we see that the computer has accidentally intercepted a SWORD communique detailing snippets of what we've seen so far. It wouldn't be a proper episode of WandaVision if we didn't get a creepy, hair-raising, disturbing moment, and this time that comes in the form of the entire room reading out the contents of the email in unison and then erupting into laughter. It was tantalizingly disturbing. You could see the panic and utter confusion on Vision's face at this point, all the things he's seeing and he's getting no answers to. So he decides to use his powers and he resets Norm. And he snaps back into reality, and you see immediately he's panicking. He's talking about his sister. Where's my family? Where's my phone? I gotta call my dad. A couple of notable things here. One, Norm seems to, right off the bat, have an understanding that he's not where he's supposed to be, and that an amount of time has passed. So it brings into question how deep under are their actual conscious minds. Now, I wrote down some of the things that he says. She's in my head. None of it is my own. It hurts. God, it hurts. You have to make her stop. Well, this is probably a solid indicator that Wanda is the one doing this. It is also important to note that he never says you have to stop Wanda. He just says you have to stop her. And now, if we're to assume that Agnes has a greater role to play in the story, then perhaps she is the one mind controlling people. You know, the thing that I was discussing with some people while watching this episode was that Wanda's mind control has a very particular aesthetic to it, with the red hue of her energy glowing in the minds and in the eyes of the people that she controls. We've seen it previously in Age of Ultron, and hell, we see it later in this episode when she confronts the Sword Soldiers. None of those visual cues are present on any of the members of Westview. Does that mean, perhaps, that someone else is controlling them, not Wanda? Wanda's just the red herring. Horrendously disturbed by all of this, and seeking to spare Norm of further pain, he taps him on the temples again and snaps him back into character. And he immediately falls back into the corny internet jokes he was making as if nothing happened. Back at the house, when the twins ask Wanda why Vision is at work on a Saturday, Wanda tells them, in response to the, I'm going to say, disagreement they had in the kitchen earlier about Wanda using her powers, Vision needed a distraction. Again, there's mounting evidence that seems to suggest that Wanda has a degree of control. And I don't think that I can any longer deny that to some degree she's influencing events that are going on in here. But again, I don't think that she is the big bad villain. At least not of this show. The twins ask her about her brother, Pietro, and remembering him this time doesn't completely derail her mentally like Monica mentioning him in episode 3 did last time. The scene is punctuated by Monica's clever plan to use a drone circa the 1980s to penetrate unchanged into the Hex. Monica attempts to speak with Wanda, and when that doesn't seem to work, Hayward panics and attempts to fire a missile at her and the kids. The camera cuts out, and now this was a shocking scene. Wanda walks out of the Hex, confronts Hayward and the Sword Soldiers. Now, I'm having a little bit of trouble on how else to spin this other than her being villainous here, because this isn't a situation where there was some subtle character acting in her face that maybe suggested, oh, she's under a spell, she's under some kind of influence, she doesn't look like she knows where she is. No, she seemed fully lucid, cognizant, and, environmentally aware of where she was and what she was saying. It's also interesting to note that, now she has her, as she's speaking, she has her subtle Sokovian accent back. She just warns Hayward and the soldiers, stay out of my home. I have everything I want, and no one will ever take it from me again. She mind warps the soldiers around Hayward, and they turn their guns on him. And as she turns to leave, she alters the border of the Hex, presumably to now make it impenetrable to further attempts to send things inside. Again, this really made me wonder if they are indeed going to make Wanda the primary villain. There's mounting evidence to that opinion, but I still think it's more complicated than that. If I had to guess, based on what we hear her start to admit later on in the episode, I think that she is allowing herself to be deluded in order to, and albeit in a very screwed up way, in order to remain with Vision and their kids. I think at some point, she probably was under some sort of spell, and maybe because she's a magical being herself, maybe because she's just very powerful, kind of wizened up the same way we're seeing Vision wind up, but decided to ignore it because she's in a really dark mental place. Despite everything wrong with it, she does have Vision back, and they do have kids. So I really don't blame her if this is what's going on for wanting to stay inside the Hex. We get our commercial that we get every episode, and this is a little dark this time, considering that the tagline was, for when you make a mess that you didn't mean to make. And the paper towel ad just seemed to be referring to Lagos when she blew up that building and hurt all those people. It it's a little dark. The next thing we see is the kids and Wanda looking for Sparky, who ran out the door during the whole drone thing. And like I mentioned earlier, we run into Agnes's house, which next thing we see is Wanda and the kids looking for Sparky, who ran out the door during the whole drone thing. And they eventually find that he had gotten into Agnes's azalea bushes, eaten a bunch of them, and died. This scene is interesting for a whole bunch of reasons. One, like I said previously, Agnes seems to want the kids to age up. And you have to think, after watching the entire episode, was the dog a whole ploy by her to try and get that to happen? Because it got them to age up from 5 to 10, and maybe she killed it on purpose to try and get them to age up again. We get a fantastic character moment where Wanda has to explain to the kids that death is a part of life and it's not something that you can run from, which is just heartbreaking. Because not only do we know that she knows what she's talking about, but we don't even think that she's following her own advice, considering everything that we've found out about the nature of the Hex and what's going on with Vision here. 3. If you think about it, numerous times in previous episodes, Agnes has said that she is Wanda's next-door neighbor. Oh, not your right, my right. Even in this episode, she says that she was able to see that the twins got that dog through the bay window in the back of their kitchen. How is that possible if they had to walk down the street to find Sparky in her azalea bushes? Nice little bit of cinematography here. We see the final establishing shot of the outside of the house that the anamorphic lens flares are actually red, like Wanda's powers. How do I know what a lens flare is? Well, I actually shoot on an anamorphic lens myself, and you can see that it's only anamorphic lenses that give you those really nice linear lens flares. So there you go. The whole episode, actually, now that I think about it, seems to have been filmed on VHS, which is fitting of the time, because you kind of see that throughout the episode, slight RGB channel distortion that you get on old VHS tapes. In fact, you could even make the case that at some points, the red channel in the RGB is emphasized just a teeny little bit more than the blue and the green, because obviously, again, Wanda's powers are red, so maybe that was an aesthetic thing that they were doing. And now we get the crescendo of the episode, and that is Vision confronts Wanda about everything that's been happening so far. They start having an argument, and you could tell that he's very upset, and he's kind of just done. She tries to wave him off, and he says, "What? So we can go watch TV? Go to bed so you can change everything again?" I was like, Paul Bettany and Elizabeth Olsen are killing it in this episode. They're killing it in the whole show, but they killed it in this episode, especially Paul. They argue, and my brain started to have a conniption, because the credits roll, and so you see that and you're thinking that the episode is wrapping up, but the argument continued. So I had a little, what's going on here? And the argument literally rips through the credits. And Vision's asking her all these questions. What is the Maximoff anomaly? Norm has a family that you're not letting him see. He can't get to them. What are you doing? And he says something that, honestly, I have to tell myself at this point. He says specifically, I have to believe that all of this, started subconsciously before you became aware of it. I have to believe that at this point. Vision then yells at Wanda, "Stop lying to me," and he gets up off the ground. He's levitating a little bit. And Wanda reacts, almost with shock and says, "You've never spoken like this to me before." His response is that as he's becoming more and more hysterical, "I can't remember anything. I can't remember my life outside of Westview." And I have to think that whatever's going on with Vision here, is it his reanimated corpse? Is this been a hard computer reset? Whatever's going on, is this a Baby Groot scenario? Wherein the very act of resurrecting him, or reanimating him, or resetting him, or whatever this is, has turned him into, internally at least, a new character separate from the Vision that we've seen before. The two of them end up on the couch, and Wanda just seems to start admitting to Vision and herself that stuff is wrong here. She admits that she can't remember how this all started. And she also, throughout the argument, vehemently defends herself, saying that she doesn't know what Vision's talking about when he mentions her controlling other people and doing all of this harm. This makes me think that there is some glimmer of hope that my earlier assessment could be true. Wanda was at one point being deluded too, and doesn't have a full understanding of what's going on. And at this point is just in too deep and has decided she's along for the ride, because she's like, okay, well, screw it. At least I have my husband back and we have kids now. why would I want to mess this up, as screwed up as it is? We are prevented from any further realizations, however, with a knock on the door. I thought this was really funny. Vision just at this point doesn't believe Wanda at all when she says, I didn't do that, Viz, you have to believe me. And he says in a very curt, vision-y way, Wanda, I really want to believe you, but at this point I'm ignoring statistics entirely. I really love when they throw in those little Vision computational dialogue blurbs. It reminded me of how wordy and verbose he was during the Sokovia Accords oversight speech he gave in Civil War. Wanda opens the door, and I expected it to be Agnes for a fourth time. I was almost tuned out. And I was like, okay, this is the end of the episode. It's going to be Agnes distracting them from arguing, and that's it. But you can tell from Wanda's reaction when she opens the door that that's not who it is. With Darcy watching the screen, she opens the door, and it's Pietro. But it's not Aaron Taylor Johnson. It's Evan Peters. If you don't know why this is a huge deal, you should. Because Evan Peters played Quicksilver in the X-Men movies. What? Wow, I cannot believe that they actually did this. Never in a million years did I think that this was actually gonna be what happened. I saw him in the cast list. It was one of the first things I did when I was researching before the show started, and I saw that Evan Peters was in the cast list, and I did what everybody did. Oh my gosh, is this gonna be some multiverse stuff? And then you calm yourself down and you're like, no, there's no way that would happen, and they would never do that. I initially assumed that he was going to be playing one of the twins when they age up to adulthood, and it was going to be just a little meta nod to us Marvel fans in the audience that, oh, it was the actor who played Quicksilver, and now he's one of Wanda's kids. But no, they went full Monty, and they gave us this absolute earth-shattering reveal. I felt like I was in a dream watching this. I didn't think it was real. This could mean so many things. Now, before we get to what I think is most likely, let's address a prediction which I personally don't think is going to pan out to be true, but I have seen people saying, so let's just get it out of the way. And that is that Agnes manifested some sort of golem, hollow creature to further screw with Wanda's mental health. And the casting of Evan Peters was just a meta Easter egg for us Marvel fans. However, I don't think that's the case. What I really think this was Agnes seeing that Wanda was getting dangerously close to some kind of realization of the nature of the Hex, knew that she needed to distract her, and said, okay, how can I do this? Oh, what about Pietro? For some reason, I think that resurrecting the dead seems to be the line that magical beings in this show and in the universe cannot cross. The only time that Agnes perks up and reacts to something strange that Wanda does, of all the things, the kids aging up and doing magic and manifesting shit out of thin air, the only thing that she reacts to is when Billy and Tommy are begging Wanda, Mom, you can do anything, you can fix anything, bring him back. And she immediately snaps and says, you can do that. So if she's thinking to herself, I need a distraction, oh, what about Pietro? That would be perfect. Well, Pietro in this universe is dead. So let me pluck a different Pietro from an alternate universe and drop him in here and send him in.
You just blew my mind.
I think that there is a couple of things to suggest that it is actually the character of Quicksilver from the X-Men universe dropped into this universe. Now, if you go back and you watch that scene with the narrated subtitles that blind persons use in order to understand what's going on, it says this.
In Westview, Wanda stares at the version of Pietro from the X-Men films.
What else could that mean, you guys? Now it would make sense that Evan Peters' Quicksilver is just playing along, because like every other character / person we've seen in the Hex so far, his mind is probably being controlled, his memory's been wiped, he doesn't know what's going on. Maybe if Vision resets him the same way that he reset Norm, he'd start spouting off about James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender and all the Fox X-Men characters. Again, if that's really what they're doing, this is now, in my opinion, the most important scene in a Marvel property, because it gives us the multiverse, right? Each phase of Marvel has strove to introduce its audience members to a new aspect of the MCU. You know, Iron Man was the introduction to it all, the introduction of technology, of superheroes in general. Guardians of the Galaxy and Thor gave us that more cosmic Marvel, this is a bigger universe than you think kind of thing. Doctor Strange was a toe in the door of the multiverse and multiple universes. But if that is what they're doing here, then This is going to lead perfectly right into Doctor Strange 2 and the Multiverse of Madness, which, no secret, Elizabeth Olsen is cast to show up in. She even now is dropping subtle hints that she might be also showing up in Spider-Man 3, which is also rumored to be a multiverse crossover of Tom Holland, Tobey Maguire, and Andrew Garfield all showing up as their respective Spider-Men from different universes. Oh my god. I can't believe, if this is what they did, I can't believe it. This is the reason why it's fun to be a Marvel fan. That holy shit, what did I just see? What does this mean? Butterflies in your stomach moment where you can't believe what you just saw. It also depends how much of an evil genius you want to think Kevin Feige is. You could make the argument that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was not only a fantastic movie, but a proof of concept test that regular audiences could digest and understand and get excited about multiverse concepts. Because that's a big pill to swallow. Multiple universes, this character's from one universe, this character's from a different universe. That's a lot for a studio to ask the layman to understand. So you would think that it's going to be a very slow burn easing us into the multiverse within these movies. But if this is what they're doing, then this would be square one. And then on top of all of that, if you want to think about the fact that, Wanda's in denial and she's in too deep, getting her brother back is just another hook that Agnes or whoever else is controlling this just threw into Wanda to want to keep her wanting to stay within Westview. This episode was fantastic. Oh my gosh. We learned, even without the Evan Peters reveal, which was probably the most shocking thing I've seen in a media property this year so far, we learned so much about what we think is going on. We saw scenes that gave us greater clarity to different characters' motivations, and again, like has been the theme with episodes in the past, every time they give us answers, it raises more questions. The stage is definitely set for some big stuff to come, and I really can't wait to see what they do with Evan Peters' Quicksilver. This could be the start of something huge. That's the breakdown, you guys. Absolute bombshell of an episode. Again, please like and subscribe to the channel if you want to keep seeing these breakdowns, and I will see you again next week for episode 6.